In this video, we're going to be talking about what you need to look for when you're buying a used car. These days, cars are really expensive, and with the unfortunate inflation that's going on in the world, cost of living has risen massively, so a lot of people are turning to used cars. Used cars offer a fantastic value proposition where you can buy a used vehicle where someone's already taken the big hit on depreciation, and if it's been well looked after, you can find yourself a bargain. So with that being said, let's get into it. The most important thing that you should do before you even look at the car is to run a online vehicle check. I believe these are called a PPSR, Personal Property Security Register. It runs a check to see if the car's been in an accident, if it's had any insurance claims, if it's been written off, if there's finance owing, because no matter how well the car presents or how good it seems on paper, if it's been written off 3 times and it's got finance owing or it's been stolen, then that can really, to be honest, that would steer me off, especially if the owner hasn't actually described it in the ad. So step 1, do a PPSR. The company that I like to use is Car Vertical. This is not a sponsored post. Car Vertical probably don't even know who I am. I found that Car Vertical has got the most thorough process where it gives you practically all of the information that you would ever need, ranging from failed rego checks all the way up to the insurance photos from when the car was in an accident. That's probably the biggest point of difference that Car Vertical has over all of the other providers. So yeah, run a PPSR check and see if it's been stolen or finance is owing, the main ones. We'll start at the front of the car. So there's quite a few things to look out for. The first thing that I like to look out for is the number plate holder. If the car is quite a few years old, have a look to see if the number plate holder matches what's on the rear. If the rear is different to the front, there's a good chance that the car may have been in an accident or the bumper's been off. It's not always a telltale sign, but if you find an older car that's got a matching number plate cover from the front to the rear, that's always a good sign. Secondly is just have a look at the condition of the front bumper. Are there any rock chips, scratches, dents? The front bumper on all cars generally always gets hammered in one way or another, just from general use. Run your hand under the bumper and see if you can feel any like scrapes, like when someone's gone over a speed bump a little bit too quickly, especially on a car like this that's low from factory. In regards to having any dents or imperfections in the paint, most cars, the front bumper's made from plastic, and then other panels like the fenders and the bonnet are made from steel or aluminium. It's generally steel. Problem with steel is that if the rock chip has taken paint away, then that panel can start rusting around that isolated area. So in this case, I've actually got a rock chip and I actually need to get onto it. Talking about it now. Have a look at the headlights. Make sure to have a really good look at the headlights. Make sure that they work, all of the different functions like the low beam, high beam, the parker lights, and also the indicators. All headlights have also got a drain in them because it's a plastic component, and the actual headlight motor inside, in this case it's an LED, the actual ballast or igniter, depending on what you want to call it, gets really hot. So there's often a vent that sits in one of the top corners up there sometimes. And if these vents get blocked or twisted, sometimes it can allow like moisture to get inside and it can actually corrode the internal components of the headlight. Like a headlight like this that's got a bi-xenon projector there, these headlights are actually quite expensive to replace. So it's just something to think about. If you're having a look at the car and there's moisture in the headlight, then that's definitely something to consider. At the very least, it's something that's worth getting an expert to have a look at. Whilst we're having a look at the front, just check and make sure that the panel gaps appear even on both sides. If a car's been in an accident, then these often never really line up exactly how they're meant to. This can also be quite car specific, so having knowledge of what a particular car's panel gaps looks like is really helpful. Some cars like McLaren's have got horrendous panel gaps. So that's just something to consider. So, all right, now that we're getting to the side of the car, just have a good look and make sure that the actual body line appears to be straight. This is a really important step because if the car's, again, if there's any accident damage, you'll know pretty quickly because it's often quite hard to get all the panels to line up correctly. Have a look from the front to the back and then go to the rear. And then have a look from the rear to the front and see if it matches. In this case it does, but this is my car and I know it hasn't been in any accidents, so that's always quite nice. Wheels and tires. So just have a really good look at the actual wheel. How does it present? Is there any curb rash? Can you see any cracks in the actual rim? How does the paint look? Does it look like it's previously been refurbished? These are all things you have to ask yourself when you're having a look at a car. In regards to the actual tire, are they running a set of budget tires. If the car you're looking at is running on a set of budget tires, it generally means that the car's been run on a shoestring budget. Either it's been run on a shoestring budget, or the person's just put a set of cheap wheels just so they can sell it, and so it's in a roadworthy state. The next thing that you need to have a look at are the brakes. How much pad material is left? Are there any lips on the actual brake disc? If you run your finger from along the edge of the disc, you'll often see if there's a lip on the disc. Are the discs blue or purple? If you see a car that's got blue or purple discs, this always means that it's either had a hard life or someone's really been having a lot of fun in it. I had to move because there was a huge wasp. It was freaking me out a bit. So yeah, just have a good look at the brakes and see the state of the tires, and the brakes will tell you so much about a car. In this case, I've got a set of Continental tires that, well, they're pretty expensive, and the brakes do look like they've had a bit of use, which, well, they definitely have. Hop inside and turn the wheel so you can get a better look at the tire. How is the tire wear? Are they worn on the edges and there's plenty of tread in the middle? If the tire is underinflated, it'll generally wear more quickly on the shoulders, the outer edges, and there'll be quite a bit left in the middle. Whereas if it's overinflated, the edges will be fine, but the actual center section of the tire, it'll be worn a lot more here, because when you overinflate a tire, it essentially has a ballooning effect. Just something else to look out for, and make sure you do this very thoroughly on all four corners, because checking tires and brakes, it's a very important thing to at least have an understanding of how the car's been treated and what you may need to replace in future. Now that we're moving a little bit further on, just have a look at the general state of all the plastic trims to see if there's any scratches or if they're worn or faded. If they're faded, then that means the car spent a lot of time in the sun, which is generally not ideal. But yeah, just have a look and make sure that everything works. So in this case, this car has comfort access, so you do that to lock, and then you put your hand here to unlock, and then just open everything up and just have a look at the general state of it. Is it filthy? Disclaimer, there's been a pretty big storm here in the last couple of days, so I haven't really had the chance to clean this car out, but I'm also not trying to sell it. So just have a look and just make sure that everything works. Just go through all the buttons, just make sure that everything works well. Is there any rust on the actual sill? I mean, this car's an Australian delivered car, so rust is generally not really a concern for us. So yeah, just go through, make sure that all of the door handles working from inside and outside. Open up the fuel flap. Is it filthy and are there spiders in there? Again, just keep checking. If you see any dents, you should really take photos of them and see if they'll pop out, like this one here. This dent will probably pop out through paintless dent removal, but others will need to be sanded, bondoed, and painted. And whilst you're doing this, just continue to check all the panel gaps to make sure that they're all even across the panels. Moving to the back, first thing to do is to check the number plate cover. In this case it matches, and then just have a look at the tail lights. Are they cracked? Is there moisture or water in them? Always try and bring a friend so then they can activate the brake lights whilst you inspect to make sure that everything works. In most modern cars, if there's a light out that doesn't work, it'll throw a warning light on the dashboard, but it's always good to just triple check. Next thing, just open the boot. How does the actual latch feel? If a car's been in an accident, you'll notice that there's quite a notchy, or it makes quite a big thump. In this case, it opens quite nicely, just how it should. How are the boot struts? Are they soft? Are they failing? Car has a sunroof. Just make sure you check out the drains and see if they're blocked. In this case, they're clear, and same on the other side, clear as well. Next thing you want to do is to pull up the boot floor and to check for any moisture and seam sealer. Have a look at the boot floor. Is there any cracking? Is there any cracking? Is there any moisture or signs of moisture or corrosion? Does everything look like it's factory and original? If the car is fitted with one of these, just have a look and make sure it's in date. Yeah, this one's really old. Just have a really good look at the hinges and actually test the function of the door to make sure that it's not notchy and these aren't loose, or the actual door strap is not failing. On some cars, they actually have like a fabric door strap, which is pretty interesting. But also, just have a look at the actual condition of the rubber harness connector. If the car's had a side impact, you'll see marks on top of all of these bolts where someone's been there to either adjust it or refit components and also carry out repairs. The whole time that you're doing this, you also want to be looking for the panel gaps, and also to see if there's a different shade of color on each individual panel. If there's a different shade on this bumper compared to this panel here, then that can mean that often one panel has been painted, or maybe there was an accident and there's been a repair that's carried out, and they often blend the two panels together. Also check to actually make sure that there's no orange peel on the actual paint. I'll throw a photo up here because it's probably a bit hard to see, plus this car doesn't have orange peel. But if the car is orange peel, that can often mean that an aftermarket repair is being carried out. Something else to mention is that you can often have the same shade of color on two different panels, but because this is metal and this is plastic, the actual color can reflect differently, so it can look like potentially there's been a repair there, but that's just something else to think about, the two different materials. And we're back to tires. Just keep having a look at the tires, the brakes, and it's also important to check the actual numbers on the actual tire. All tires have actually got a number on them, and it tells you when it was made. So I'll actually flip this upside down, but this was the 4th week of 2018, if you can read that upside down. And so yeah, just keep looking at the condition of all the doors or the seals. Are there any bolt marks on here where there's been a repair that's carried out? Check the seals, any dents, rust, or any overspray. Check the door strap and also the actual plastic harness connector. Go through the seatbelt and make sure that they actually lock. You should do this with all of the seatbelts. Check to make sure that the buckle looks like it's in good condition and actually test it. And do this with every single door. Have a look at the actual rubber door strip. Is it perished, flaking, torn? Is there actual mold on it? These are all things that you need to consider, and it gives you a much better understanding of how the car's been treated and what sort of environment it's been left in. Onto the engine bay. First thing I always look for when inspecting an engine bay are the actual chassis legs and any of the reinforced components that tie often the front crash structure to the actual strut top. Have a look at the seam sealer. Does it seem consistent on both sides? And does it look like it's been applied in the factory and not after some accident by some guy with an eBay cork gun? The next thing that I like to look for is inspecting the chassis legs. I'll throw a photo up here because it's going to be really hard for me to capture what these chassis legs look like. But just make sure that they're straight, they aren't bent, and it doesn't look like that they've been painted before or there's been any repairs being carried out. If the front chassis legs are bent, then the car's been in a pretty big accident, one way or another. And then just have a general look at the actual state of it. Does it look like it's clean? Has someone been here recently? And then obviously check all of the levels. Check the coolant level. In this particular car, you have to check the engine oil level when the engine's hot. How does the accessory belt look? Are there any engine oil or coolant leaks? Look for all the common problems on that particular car that need work. This particular charge pipe always explodes on N55s. If you know, you know. If the car's getting a little bit older and there's a lot of plastic coolant parts, like in this car, how do they all look? Does it look like they've been replaced recently? You have to be really particular with this sort of stuff. Otherwise, you can get scammed. Or you can just buy yourself a lemon, unfortunately. On this side, there's the exhaust and the turbo. Normally, it'd be quite nice to actually have a look at the turbo and see if there's any heat marks, corrosion, oil leaks. Just have a look at everything and it'll give you a good idea. The next thing I like to do is to just have a look at the actual oil cap. Is there any metal on it? How does the oil look? As funny as it sounds, just give it a sniff. It smells pretty good. Well, it doesn't smell very good, but it smells like how an engine oil should. You sort of get the idea. And just make sure that all of the trims around the top, the sides, and the actual window cowling are all there and they aren't all crusty and brittle, because that'll be something else that you need to either replace or just deal with later on. If the car has a plastic engine cover like this one, make sure to always take it off and just have a look. In this particular case, this car's direct injected, so these are all the fuel hard lines. Inspect the wiring, inspect the ground points. How do the wires look? Is everything tight? And just go over everything, and at the very least, just make sure it looks how the other ones do. Are all the coils there and well secured? Are they cheap Chinese coils? All right, we're now in the car. So the next thing to do is to just have a look at the actual state. Are these plastic buttons cracked and do they actually work? Make sure to actually go ahead and test them. Yeah, they all work. I actually never use these, by the way. I think it's a pretty silly idea. And then the air conditioning, just make sure that everything works. Put on the colder setting and leave it for a minute or two. If it's a really hot day, it may take a little bit longer, but it really shouldn't take that long. If it takes a really long time and the air isn't that cold, then there's either a leak or the system needs some regassing. And then next, just go through the actual, just have a look to see if there's any current warning lights or codes. Door open, yeah, that's fair enough, it is open. And then go and check the actual servicing. I've actually got a service due next month, which is quite exciting. And then go through, if the car does not have a paper logbook, then go through and just actually check what each service was and make sure that it corresponds with the previous servicing. Something else that I always quite like to look at when I'm buying a used car is I go and have a look at the audio settings to see if someone's really cranked up the bass. If someone's really cranked up the bass, that can sometimes mean that the car is more likely to have been driven by someone who gets really excited and has probably driven it a little bit more quickly than someone who left it alone. And so yeah, just have a general look at all of the actual components, the plastic pieces, the buttons, the switches, make sure that they all work. So we're about to go for a drive, and so before you go for a drive, I always like to scan the car before you drive it and then check the actual fault codes that come up. Sometimes if there's something wrong with a car, some people might have a scan tool on them or a code reader, and they'll delete all the codes in case you bring one yourself. So scan the car, delete the faults, go for a drive, come back, scan the car again and see if any codes reappear. All right, so we're gonna go for a drive. All right, check the seatbelt that you're in. Just a good idea, just double and triple check everything, because you might miss something the first time and you pick it up the second or third time. Again, just go and check all the windows, make sure that they work. If the car has a sunroof, make sure it works and it goes back all the way. If a sunroof's out of alignment, it can often make a horrendous noise, so you'll know straight away. I mean, it's my car, so I knew it was all going to work. All right, first thing you're going to do, put the car, if it's an automatic, put it in drive and see if there's a big clunk. If you put the car in drive and there's a huge clunk, that either means that the transmission's worn out or there's an issue with the mechatronics, which is the computer of the automatic gearbox. Potentially it's getting confused, or there's an issue with a solenoid inside the mechatronics. And whilst you're here, just go through reverse, just go through park, reverse, drive, before you move. All right, and then set off. I always like to drive the car in the manual mode. Two reasons for that is that you can go through each individual gear and see how each gear feels. Just go through each gear and make sure that it all shifts smoothly and as it should. I also like to put the heater on to make sure that it actually works and that the car's getting up to temperature. This is really important, especially on cars that don't have a temperature gauge, like this one. So when you're driving, listening to see if you hear any noises or vibrations. If you hear a bit of a hum or a thrum, that can often mean that there's a wheel bearing that's worn out or it's starting to fail. If you have a wheel bearing that's worn out, you can often tell if you go left and right and you unload and load that particular side of the wheel bearing, and you can often tell which side it's from, the left or the right. It's pretty hard to work out if it's coming from the front or the rear. Keep driving, enjoy yourself, have a look around. Oh, the sun's out, it's a lovely day. Something else that's really important to do that a lot of people get scared to do is to actually test the performance of the car, especially if it's a turbocharged or supercharged car, to actually make sure that the turbo is working correctly and that it's not failing. If you have a turbo that's failing, you'll either have inconsistent boost or very little boost or no boost. At the same time, if the car that you're driving is turbocharged, it likely has OBD2, so it'll come up on the code reader after you scan the car. But before you do this, just make sure you ask the owner if it's okay to go through a couple of the gears, second and third gear. And it also gives you a chance to test how the transmission shifts when it's under load. I'm just gonna hold the camera. So this car works, obviously. But again, also make sure that if you're going to do this, make sure that there's no one else around and you're not disturbing anyone. There's no school zone, kids. Like, just have a bit of common sense about it. Also, when you do put your foot down, you'll often tell if there's any boost leaks, and it makes a really high-pitched scream. It's actually kind of a funny noise. It sounds kind of pathetic, but so by testing the performance of the car, it'll tell you multiple different things. It'll tell you if the turbo is operating well, how the transmission shifts, especially under load, if there's any loose, worn, or failed bushings within the driveline, like the subframe bushings, the diff bushings, the guibo, the center support bearing. Now, it's hard to work out if you do put your foot down and you hear that. It's hard to know exactly where that noise or clunk or vibration is coming from, but it tells you enough to know that there's something not right, which is the main thing, especially when it comes to negotiation, assuming you still want it after this newfound revelation that you've just discovered. Also, try and drive on a bumpy road, because if you drive on a bumpy road, you'll hear any squeaks and rattles from any of these trims, plastic components, especially around the steering wheel. The actual rubber seal around the sunroof can often dry up. On most cars it does actually, and it can often flex, especially when you're on a bumpy road, and also on speed bumps. So make sure to go over speed bumps to check for other creaks and stuff. Another benefit of driving on a bumpy road is that if there's like a loose sway bar bushing, or there's a blown shock, or a tie rod end that's failing, you'll hear some noise, some clunking, and you'll often feel that through the steering wheel. So this is really important. Drive on a smooth surface that you know that you've driven on other cars, and then drive on a rough surface. It really helps if you know the surface and the area that you're driving around, and where to sort of test different noises and vibrations and that. Something else that I really like to do, especially if it's an automatic, is to actually check to see if the automatic transmission is slipping. This is really important on a car with higher mileage, or like a four-wheel drive that they often use for towing. So what you want to do is, before you do this test drive, go and do some research and figure out what gearbox is in the car. With this particular car, it's the ZF 8-speed, and so out of those 8 gears, one gear is 1-to-1. So what that means is that, from one revolution of the engine is 1 revolution to the output of the gearbox. So there's no reduction gear effect or torque multiplying effect via using a different ratio. So in this particular car, it's 6th gear. So go into 6th gear and floor the throttle on and off a couple times. Obviously don't do it for ages, because then you'll probably be going quite quickly, but do it a couple times and you notice the RPMs moving quite a bit, then that's often a sign that the transmission is slipping. So that can either be a torque converter that is on its way out, or transmission fluid that's burnt. However, if the transmission fluid's burnt, that often means that the actual internal components within the transmission are in a pretty bad way. So go on and off the throttle a couple of times. Yeah, and so with this car, it stayed consistent every time I hit the accelerator. If you see the RPMs jumping around a fair bit, that's often pretty bad news. Something else is that you want to shift the transmission as early as you can, and just see the point at which the torque converter locks, and make sure that it's consistent with all of the gears, apart from probably 1st gear. On a lot of cars, 1st gear, the torque converter is programmed to slip substantially longer than in other gears. And this is just to aid with stop and go like traffic. Get up to the top gear and then downshift, and just see if the transmission shift quality changes. If you start downshifting quite quickly in succession, the first shift might be average, and then by the 2nd or 3rd shift it'll work out that you want to change down often. If you downshift a couple times and then you hear a huge jolt, then that can be just a characteristic of how the engine and the ECU and the transmission control module are programmed not to rev match down. But at the very least, just make sure that it's consistent with how it's driven beforehand, assuming it's all good. So by now the heater really should be working, so if it's not working, then you're in a bit of strife, or you can use this to your advantage when you're negotiating with the seller. Whilst you're driving the car, just check the wiper blades, the windscreen washer. Something else that a lot of people don't like to do, but I feel like it's a really crucial thing to do, is to test the brakes and to make sure that the ABS works. Before you do this, ask the owner if it's okay to test out the braking performance. If you just do this unannounced, they'll often be pretty startled, which is fair enough. So get yourself on a quiet road with no one around. Again, no pedestrians, no school zone. Get up to about 50 kilometers an hour or 60 kilometers an hour, obviously depending on the speed of the road. I'm just gonna hold this camera because it's gonna go everywhere. And then once you have clear visibility, just hit the brakes as hard as you can. Like that. And you probably won't be holding a camera when you're doing this, but just take note of how the car responded. Did it pull to one side? If it did, how was the road surface? Was the road surface bumpy? Was the road surface bumpy? Was there camber on the road? Were there any grooves that you drove into as you were braking that may have pulled it to one side? Just have a bit of a think about what just happened. If you do all these things on the road test, it'll give you a pretty good idea. It'll give you a very good idea of how the car is mechanically. Also, before you go for the test drive, you should always make sure that the car is currently registered at it and insured, and that you're covered by the owner's insurance. If you were to somehow or accidentally crash the car, you could then be liable for a lot of money. Let's do a summary. First, get a PPSR, check if it's been ridden off, stolen, or it's got finance owing. Second thing is just keep double and triple checking everything. Panel gaps, rust, paint chips, dents, heat operation, buttons, service history. Just keep checking it over and over again. Third thing, take it for a good long test drive and try and check as many of the things that I've gone through in this video previously, as it'll give you a really good indication of how the car is mechanically. Fourth takeaway, if you're unsure on anything or you aren't particularly experienced with cars, then you can always hire an independent mechanic to either do an inspection on the car or a mobile service where they come out to you and the seller and he can give you a good understanding of the car. Fifth is form a scan of the vehicle before and after you drive it and to reevaluate any additional codes. I hope you found this video interesting. I've bought and sold quite a few cars in my time and I've had a few unfortunate experiences that I've now learned from. So hopefully my experience can help someone when they're next buying a used car. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and check out the merch. We've got some new merch. We've got some MC Aviation merch. And on that note, I'm actually doing my first flying lesson in the next month or so. I've got it all booked, so I'm pretty excited. So stay tuned for more.